And as I said before, I'm open to questions, but until I see somebody raise their hand, I'm not I'm going to ask one more. My prerogative. In terms of the state and the system itself, what do we have as a structure that works? What do we have as a structure that doesn't work? And basically, for lack of a clear message, who's in charge? And who leads the direction? I mean, are we splintered in a million different directions? How does it work and how should it work? You?
Why would you? Given us a little advance notice. Structure. Education should be for the kids. My first reaction to this question is the current structure is for and on behalf of teachers and the staff, and because it's union dominated. It's that simple. That doesn't mean we don't have good teachers. That doesn't mean that we don't have occasionally well-performing kids. But when you look at actually the structure of the system and whether it works for, who it works for the staff, primarily the teachers, who are unaccountable at the job site for producing outcomes. So to me, when I look at outcomes, I think of four kind of variables. The first variable is leadership. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I put probably Vermont at a 2 or a 3. I don't think anyone knows what the State Board of Ed does or is useful for. I'm sorry, I'm being very candid here. I think the superintendent on a scale of 1 to the Commissioner of Education on a scale of 1 to 10 is probably a 1, because he doesn't have authority to do anything, not because of his own capabilities. So in terms of leadership at the top, it's essentially non-existent. The third thing in terms of outcomes, once again, is teacher effectiveness. And there we have effective teachers and we have ineffective teachers, and we can't get rid of the ones that are ineffective. I have an anecdote, if we have time, that'll illustrate that. And the fourth reason is overall environment. And by environment, I mean not just within the school and whether there's a feeling of pursuit of excellence, but also the support of particularly parents. And there, I think Vermont is complacent. And they're complacent because there's a myth that we're somehow producing great kids, well-educated kids. That, in my judgment, is a myth. The national tests that compare Vermont students with the results of other kids in the country are done on an apples and oranges basis that benefit Vermont's performance because we're 95% homogeneous, i.e. white, and we have one of the lowest percentages of kids eligible for free and reduced lunch. So when you combine the homogeneousness of the population, which on average scores 10 to 15% higher than blacks and Hispanics, which are the next two largest ethnic groups, and you combine the fact that we have a low percentage of free and reduced lunch, you would think we would be knocking the ball out of the park. Well, we're not. Our scores are average. Arthur Wolf and I have been on this kick. I actually picked it up from Arthur. But Mr. Wolf writes to that issue in the Ethan Allen booklet, which does a great job on both free choice as well as performance and how it should be assessed. And if you haven't read it, I would recommend it. That's a freebie promo, John. What was the second half? Do I have time to address the second half?
Actually,
that's enough.
That's probably, and that's the sugar-coated version, so. Rob?
Well, I agree with what you opened up with, was that the focus of our education in the state needs to be directly on the kids. And again, I'm going to keep going back to school choice, so just get used to that. School choice brings that level of accountability. And some of the frustrations that Bob brought up in his answer, that as long as we see education as a liability and just a cost, we're always going to have a problem with debate, and I agree with that 100%. But one of the big reasons that we have that everybody focused just on the cost is because there's no accountability to the taxpayer. If your property taxes are going through the roof, this crazy Act 6068 system that we've created doesn't allow for any sort of accountability for the taxpayer to vote this person out or vote that person out or make their voice known in a direct and an effective way to feel like they're in control of what they're spending. Until people are restored with that feeling of control, you're always going to have a lack of accountability, and then the money question is always going to be out there in front of what's actually best for the kids. I think we have a lot of positives about education in Vermont, as Emerson brought up. You know, the state is really built for it as an economic engine. It's a safe society. Lieutenant Governor talked about it in his talk. We have very safe schools. We have good kids. We have good teachers. I think we have parents who are, by and large, willing and able to be involved in their kids' education. I think we need to tap into all that energy and resource and really focus it on making education in Vermont be for the kids. And I'll keep harping on it over the course of this panel. School choice is the best way to do that.
I would agree that education structures in Vermont and most everywhere in the country are designed for teaching and not designed for learning. We know an awful lot about learning, but very little of it is reflected in our schools. And I think that again, is reflected in the lack of student-centeredness, if we could call it that. So I certainly agree with you on that point. In terms of the accountability, one of the things that we're doing, and I think it's the only way that we can go forward with a straight face, is to start to say to teachers that you need to be evaluated based on the learning outcomes of your students. We're going to start to implement that program beginning this fall. I believe that we're leading the way in the state on that, but I'm sure there are other conversations going on. Because I think as superintendents, we realize it's simply the only way that we can provide a level of accountability that ensures we are supporting a learning culture and not a teaching culture. That would probably be the biggest change that we could bring, in my mind, structurally.
Yeah, what about the structure, though, just from the state of Vermont itself? Do you have the system that we have? Does it work? Does it not work? How could it be improved?
The problem is that we're so siloed, and I see it as a challenge. There's certainly some benefits to local control, and I know that would be popular probably with this group. By the same token, local control is really cumbersome, and we need to be nimble now. In a lot of instances, when different groups have to make decisions over and over, the same decision, it's often difficult to move forward quickly. It's kind of like the Lieutenant Governor saying something took 10 years to be approved. I feel like that in education. I feel that we're poised to implement and to move quickly on some issues, and we're prevented simply because we're accountable to small local boards. I had a conversation last week with 4 other superintendents. We were working on something almost identical, but are kind of prohibited from working on it together. Of course we collaborate, but we're reinventing it 4 times, and that doesn't need to be done. That's not a good use of our time.